let's hear from Nick Sable, Common Equity New South Wales, and thank you so much for coming all the way from Sydney, aren't you? Thank you.
Hi everybody, thank you. I'm really conscious that it's also been a very long day, packed full of great stories, great ideas. I want to acknowledge the land that we're meeting on today and pay my respects. It's such wonderful country, and also acknowledge the work that everyone here has been doing for such a long time. I'm going to be speaking specifically about a co-op rental housing model that Wendy and a few others have mentioned. I think it's a model that may work or may be part of, there's no silver bullet, it may be part of a solution. I think there's, as Wendy mentioned and spoke so well eloquently about it at a strategic point of view, at a broad level, we need lots of ideas, lots of ways to address this sort of housing, the lack of affordable housing in our society. I'm going to start, before I just want to, lots of learnings, thank you, I'm going to take away from today, but I'm just going to start and talk a bit broadly about community housing. It has been mentioned, just to give a bit of context about my work in the cooperative rental housing space. So many of you may know about community housing. They're not-for-profit organisations, charitable organisations that are set up specifically to provide and manage low-cost housing, affordable housing for people on low incomes. Now they've been around, 30 or 40 years. They started off as very small organisations. You'd be aware that there's Housing Commission or Department of Housing. Community housing organisations were often very small, managing sort of short-term accommodation. As part of sort of a housing policy change, over time, government wanted to create a little bit more choice and have tenant-led, well, not tenant-led, community organisations around managing government housing initially. These community housing organisations, and there are some very large ones up around here that you may be aware of, they're now they're quite large, and they're sort of managing and developing low, affordable housing for people on low to middle incomes, and providing up to about 30% of the stock nationally, and I think here even in New South Wales. So they're actually multi-million-dollar community organisations now developing housing units, often in large blocks of units. As Wendy said, government is really looking about, the time is right, government's really looking about how do they increase supply. I say that because Common Equity is the community housing organisation that I work for, but we're a little bit different in the community housing space. So we're a not-for-profit registered charity, but what we do is oversee, support and manage and hopefully develop cooperative rental housing in New South Wales. Cooperative housing, about probably around in the 70s and 80s, started off with, it was much more accepted in that time. I think someone talked about the 70s being much more receptive to alternate housing models. Cooperative housing was a model of housing that government actually supported. They had a cooperative housing program then. So tenant-led groups of people who were activists, who often formed around a community of interest, intentional community, needed affordable housing, needed housing that they could afford, but approached government. Often it wasn't a quick response, but they approached government, worked government. They got government grants and they got to either purchase properties or purchase land and develop properties. So what you had over the time was like 40 or 50 small tenant-led housing groups that were renting, paying low-cost rent in properties that they managed and worked with government, but they were government-owned. What happened, I suppose, as we've been talking about here and people have been mentioning, we live in an age where increasingly regulation has just gone through the roof. Compliance has gone, that's become much more complex. And co-ops eventually were tenant-led forms of housing that government said, no, we don't want to deal with all these sort of small sort of groups of housing cooperatives. They were supported by a resource agency, a not government resource agency, to make sure that people could manage and these properties well. But government said, look, no, we're over all these small organisations. We just want to deal with fewer, larger community housing providers. State government, but it's right across really, in all states. But in New South Wales, that was the thing. So we were formed Common Equity, so that's why I gave the community housing context. We're a community housing provider. We were formed about 15 years ago to actually manage and oversee these housing cooperatives in New South Wales. I was obviously not around at that time, but I heard stories that, it was one of those situations where at the time government was found cooperative housing too hard to manage, and they were just going to say, we just want you to go to a community housing provider. But a fate, I don't know, change of government or something, we were actually created to be the housing provider so we deal with government around all the compliance and all the regulation, and we have a mandate and a constitution to support housing cooperatives. So what do we look like now? So what's the co-op housing, rental co-op housing space in New South Wales look like now? So we have about 32 co-ops, housing co-ops, all around New South Wales. The majority are in greater metropolitan Sydney. But it was great when I got the invite from Jenny because we have a small housing co-op here in northern New South Wales, so it was an opportunity to see and visit that co-op. So we've got a sprinkling of small co-ops up and down the coast and some out west, but the majority are in greater metropolitan Sydney. Like people have mentioned, that co-ops all come in all shapes and different sizes. So our smallest co-ops are 6 to 10 properties, and some are up to 50 units of housing in one sort of complex. They cover and they support a range of people on low incomes. So we have a diverse range of cultural co-ops from different cultural backgrounds. We've got Vietnamese seniors co-op, a Hindu co-op, Tamil co-op, Spanish co-op, Arabic co-op, where communities of people, intentional communities, have come together and created these tenant-led forms of housing. But we've also got housing for single women, young people's housing, an artists co-op, and a number of our co-ops are for people who are older. So, I think our Hindu co-op, the average age is about sort of late 80s or early 90s. But because they're living together, I think it actually supports a living environment where they're not having to go to live in a nursing home or an aged care facility. They actually get the support of the tenants around them in the co-op housing model. The way it works, a bit more specifically, is that it's a tenant-led model. It's a model where the people actually manage the properties that they live in. They select the tenants, they manage the properties and tenancies, they ensure that they create sort of activities and communities for the tenants to operate. They have a board. They're legally constructed as under fair trading as a housing cooperative. So they actually manage their properties and tenancies. People pay 25% of their household income in rent. It is housing in perpetuity. So people actually at the time of entering the co-op, I think Shane asked about this, they have to be on a low income. They have to be on probably housing, Department of Housing's meet their eligibility criteria. However, we also have a slight change in that because 65% of people in our co-ops can enter on a low income, but 35% can be on affordable housing rents, so that they can earn more moderate incomes and come into what is long-term affordable housing. I suppose our role in that is that we're different than most other community housing providers where we're the landlord and the person is the tenant. We actually work with the co-op and we support the co-op in their governance of this housing. We provide training and support to ensure that it's a governance model. We provide them with training and support. We do the more complex asset management stuff like kitchens and bathrooms over time. We do all the compliance and regulatory stuff that is required by government. We have an environment where these are volunteer groups of people who are managing their housing, but government has increasing regulation, increasing standards, a range of things, and so we fulfil that role. And so we have the contract with government, and we also, I suppose, actually can access, as Wendy was saying, finance or a range of ways of working with government to bring finance in so we can actually develop new housing. Wendy's research was great because we have known the benefits of this type of rental housing for communities for a long time. We know, anecdotally, we felt that cooperative rental housing does have a whole lot of beneficial benefits in terms of health and well-being, skills development, safety and security, support, community connection, than other forms of community housing. Wendy's research, and we were so pleased to be able to be part of that, actually created an evidence base in Australia because it was the first bit of research on rental co-op, the value and benefit of rental cooperative housing in Australia. We can now use that evidence base to actually advocate to government to say this is a very viable and beneficial form of housing. It's just not community housing or affordable housing for long term, but actually gives back. It creates community, notwithstanding the great stuff that Carol said, that whilst you have a model around a cooperative model, actually how you work and support and create community within that, because you get a group of people together and, you know, things can go up and down. But that's also our role, is working with those co-op housing organisations to ensure that they're governed well, that they get the training to manage their properties and tenancies appropriately. We're a small part of the sector, so we're only 1% of community or social housing across Australia. However, the co-op housing tour overseas, visited places where co-op housing is like up to 20 to 25% of community or affordable housing in community. We're only 1% here in Australia, and I guess we're working with, and we've got a network with our similar type of organisations in other states where we can actually a mandate to actually grow community rental co-op housing. We want it to be like 10% of community housing over the next 10 years. So that is quite a significant growth spurt for us. I guess the thing about this is is this relevant for a community like Nimbin or around here? The value, I think, that cooperative rental housing and working with a registered community housing provider like ourselves can bring is to actually, we need to think around ranges and different ways in which we can bring money in to create and develop new co-op housing. The cost is incredible. Construction cost is incredible. Land is just high value. How do we bring together all the elements and create a new small cooperative housing development? A couple of examples about what we've done in Sydney and around is that because we're a registered community housing provider, we get access to cheaper finance through Housing Australia and through a range of government programs. I'm glad the Labor got in federally, because the Libs were actually going to can these programs, because we need actually these types of programs in our space, in the community cooperative space, to actually help finance new developments. So we can get access to what is called HAF funding through Housing Australia. We can get access through that to low interest or interest-only loans. We can get access to government grants that help build what we call the capital stack, to be able to put together a financial model to buy land, construct new housing for people on low incomes. Where an example of this was in Sydney. Because of our organisation, we got access to council land at below market value, 70% of below market value. We applied to both federal and state government funding bodies, and we brought in, $3 or $4 million in grant funding, which helped us purchase the council land, and which will help us to purchase and refurbish some properties. We've worked with, in another project, and then through philanthropic organisations, through the rental that we get from the tenants who are living in the houses that we're managing. They collect the rents, they keep some of that for their repairs and maintenance, and then they pass on some for us, for our operations. So we're not government funded in the sense that we get a supply of government funding. We're actually funded working with the co-ops around from the tenant rents that the tenants pay. However, because of the nature of the way we're registered, we can access finance, we can access government grants. We have we just developed 22 units of housing for Vietnamese seniors out in Western Sydney. They started their first co-op in the 80s, 7 properties that they got from government. Over that time, and with this development, they're now managing 90 properties in Western Sydney. We were able to access government grants to help construct that. We had bought a bit of land a few years ago on which we contributed to the capital stack, and the co-op itself actually had saved some money over that period of time, and they actually contributed their own sort of savings or surplus. So with that sort of I suppose bank of money, we were able to develop 22 units of rental co-op housing. So I guess I just wanted to put that type of model and that type of arrangement and that type of working together that might be useful in an area like this where land is unaffordable. So if council or if government is receptive to the housing needs of people in this area, there are ways which I think partnerships are critical. There are ways in which it might be useful, this type of model, where it's a form of low-cost housing, it's long-term rental housing, but the distinguishing feature is it's under the co-op model where people themselves are managing, they've got agency, they've got control, and they're empowered to manage the housing in the way that they want it. And we're a community housing provider that can assist these co-ops to manage this housing together, and then I suppose get access to different forms of finance. I think I might just leave it there. I'm conscious of time. It's a bit of a whirlwind tour of rental housing co-ops in New South Wales and the community housing space. So thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, I am very new to this whole space, but this is also the first time I've ever heard of this. So I'm very naive with my questions, sorry.
That's okay.
So I am 41 years old, have a bit of savings. What could I do? I don't have heaps of savings, but if I was to go from here, inspired by your talk, what could the individual do with your model, so to speak?
Okay, so
If anything.
yeah, so look, I think as Wendy said, the space is right around now for new models or disruption, or government actually is looking to different ways to increase supply. But I think it's not only supply; it's the way communities and way people want to live. So there are shared equity schemes that government is putting out for individual people who might have access to some money, and with the right, and government will stump up the rest for housing purchase. I guess what we're looking at and increasingly is to make is if there are groups of people, like-minded people that might come around for a particular reason. They might be an age thing, or it might be, Wendy mentioned the missing middle. So there are many people who have a little bit of money who want to actually, how do you sort of get access to safe and secure and long-term housing that's affordable? So Wendy mentioned a group called the Property Collectives, and we've been working with them and a co-housing group in Sydney to try and look at ways in which, as Wendy said, it often just works out for people who have high, it costs to make that model work. It costs. So we're trying to work with them and a co-housing group, of which some people have money and some people are on low incomes. And how can a community housing provider, which is around co-op housing, work with that group, work with property collectives to create a mixed tenure model? So some people might be able to come in, and so you buy a share in a co-op. And some people might, and that will allow you, so it will allow mixed tenures where people have, who might be on market housing, people who might be paying affordable housing rates, or people on low incomes. I don't have we're still working on that model. And it is something that I think is potentially available, and whether you call it limited equity or shared equity or a mixed tenure model, we need to make that type of model work. So there are conversations being had, there are people there who are trying to make some stuff like that happen. But I do know of community housing organisations who would do a development, and often the way that they can, that stacks up financially is that they will do some social housing, some affordable housing for rent, and some market housing for rent, because they need that rental income to make their financial model stack up. And they can still access low interest loans to make that work. So I think there's a bit of stuff happening. There's no definitive answer that I can give now, but I think government is looking at individual shared equity schemes as well. So, yeah.
I can't just go find 50 friends and come to you and say, I have 50 friends, can
we can start, you can, and we can start that conversation. And then, look, that sort of stuff is, as people would know, developing new housing takes time. That's why we've got such a housing crisis. There's been no investment in housing for so long, and now we need to create supply. You need to find land, you need to bring people together around, you need to get the finance together, you need to meet all these regulatory requirements and stuff. So it is a long haul. What I was most impressed by the people who formed these early cooperatives is they worked together often for 4 or 5 years before, and longer, before they actually got the funding, and they worked with government to create this co-op housing. So it is not just like off the shelf, but there's a bit of work, but I believe it can happen and the time is right. Yep.
Hi, and thanks for sharing what's happening in New South Wales and mainly the city. I'm really curious to know how you're saying that your model sort of started 15 years ago, basically?
We were created 15 years ago, but rental co-op housing has been around for 40 years, 50 years. Yep.
Well, you know, here we are sitting in the this building hosted by the Aquarius Foundation. People came 53 years ago. It was started by, the idea was brought through architectural students coming here and building things, trying to find ways of building cheaper housing. This is all in the 70s. We've witnessed capitalism on steroids ever since, and privatisation. This is something we haven't sort of talked into the fact that today how much, well, it's been talked around how much harder it is just to get it happening. I just end up thinking we really need, I did hear Rob say we had a intentional community group that I hadn't even heard of. I just feel like my question is, how can we become more vocal, more influential in this capitalist greed society that we're fighting against, and we've come to a point where there's not enough houses for everyone, particularly, of course, it's for the poor, and they get a less and less of a look in every day, it seems, low-income people. How can we get ourselves organised and get a lobby group happening to work in with local, state and federal governments to get a more fairer share and let people be informed about the situation on the ground here, and in the city, of the lack of housing, and how quicker can we get it happening with lobby groups and organisations that can push it a little bit better.
An example that I'm aware of, and I'm sure Wendy is as well, is a housing matters action group in Belgium that has been around for a little while now, and they're very active, and to the point where, and some of the people in that action group, so they've got together like this, started off discussing housing issues that are sort of like this. They've actually sort of worked and mobilised that they've become a lobby group, and they've invited council or talked to council, raised the issue of affordable housing. Key workers can't afford to stay in the town because they can't find or afford housing there. To the point now where they're actually looking at a demonstration project where they're creating a community land trust, which will be and working closely with council, hopefully to have some land that they've been able to work with council on to get council to come on board. A community land trust will manage that land in perpetuity, and what it does, it takes the cost of land out of the equation. So they're looking at people coming in, people meeting affordable housing guideline, eligibility guidelines, who are coming in and actually, I don't know how it's going to be financed, but they will finance the build of, maybe half a dozen or 10 to 15 homes, but just constructing the home, so it's much more affordable. So it's through that action group that they've actually developed a very close relationship with council, raised the issue of affordable housing, and had Rose Jackson up there. They've had ministers up there, and Rose Jackson is, talk about the time is right. You've got a really good housing minister, you've got really good people in government who are actually trying to think outside the square, because there's no silver bullet around this sort of stuff. So people are receptive. I know Rose Jackson has attended co-housing seminars and forums around this sort of stuff. So they're looking for new ideas. But that is an example of an action group, I think, that I'm aware of, that actually is really creating and will put housing on the ground.
What about changing building regulations and look, there's not much wood left to build houses without a wood anymore, and it's too costly, but it was always overloaded.
Yeah, there's a lot to... lot to reset. Yep.
Just quickly on the action thing, that group that Rob talked about, I just talked to him before. I can share that if people want to join that, because it's just sitting there, not really active at the moment. So there is already a platform there that if we want to, as communities, become a lobby group, it's just sitting there. We can take it over and control it and start lobbying, which was what it was created for. So I can share that. Just a question, I guess, we are in Nimbin, we've talked about land sharing communities. Do you see there's a possibility of possible housing co-op creating a land sharing community as an affordable rental land sharing community or something like that? If we're thinking outside the box.
Look, I don't know enough about that, but definitely worth having conversations around that. When Rob was speaking about sort of housing hubs closer to town or village with people who maybe are getting older and needing, but who have been in sort of community, that sort of sparked some interest, and I felt that type of housing, a co-op housing model in that space would work well. I don't know enough about land sharing, but I'm sure, I think we're all looking at different ways of doing things. The only thing I'd say around that sort of stuff for a rental housing co-op and a community housing provider, and it's been mentioned quite a bit before, is that when there's so much regulation, so many hoops. You talked about why creating a community housing provider and the complexity around that. So as a registered community housing provider, we deal with that complexity, and we have to, because that's the way that we manage government properties. If we're getting government grants or managing government finance, there are so many things that we need to tick off from a risk, probity, accountability sort of level. However, that's our job, and we're prepared to do that. And so to enable co-op, rental co-op housing to exist. And we can get access to that sort of stuff. So with that proviso, I'm sure sometimes it just has to tick some of those boxes to be able to make it happen. But, it's not to say it can't. So, yeah.
And is there an equivalent in Queensland, of Common Equity?
No, not as far as I know. We're part of an Australian Community Co-op Housing Alliance. So we're here in New South Wales. There's a big co-op housing organisation, like our sister organisation in Victoria. They own all their properties. There are about 2,000 plus properties, over 100 rental housing co-ops there. There is a rental housing co-op sector. There's some in South Australia, a small one in Victoria, but as far as I'm aware, there's nothing in Queensland.
And just quickly, I think the hurdle would be, as long as the co-op could own the land and, as you said, have some sort of, ability in that space with the rural land sharing. It's just a different mindset of it's a rental rather than ownership. It probably could happen, but it has to be that might. I think a lot of people, when they buy shares, they want to own. There's that mindset shift of the co-op owns the share, but I can live here for.
Sort of giving finance to a co-op model. I mean, finance is so geared to individual sort of homeowners, really. So MOs, how do you attract finance to that? Similarly, for a co-op, establishing that, I guess they want to go, we can hook on to a community housing provider because we know that they meet all these benchmarks, they're a safe bet. But how do you do it just as a cooperative? I mean, some challenges, but worth a discussion and teasing out. Yep.
Thank you. In relation to action groups and things like that, I think it's going to become more and more important, especially for the Lismore City Council area, to have action groups. We've got a very negative council at the present moment. The LEP is due for renew in June 26th, and with a motion on the table, didn't go through last week, but possibly will, to remove the
the ability to have an MO or to even apply for one. So that started here. I mean, one particular councillor is saying that MOs are more trouble than they're worth, etc., etc. And yet Byron has become more progressive with the Myocum development and relocating homes there, as has the Afterlead within the Kyogle. So Lismore does seem to be out of kilter with modern thinking. The other thing that they did at a meeting maybe a couple of weeks ago was remove, and they agreed to remove the word affordable housing. So affordable has gone from their lexicon. They did move it to change that to diverse housing, which kind of counterbalanced the fact that they want to get rid of MOs and some of the diversity. So I do think that if people are interested in getting an action group, it is vital that we do that and have a concerted effort and a rebuff to those things that are happening in the LEP in June 26. Thank you.
Thanks. Good point.
Just following on from what this lady was saying, you can actually have your say as well on the Have Your Say page of the Lismore Council. At the moment, until the 12th of June, you can comment on those changes to those documents. So totally worth doing. Yeah, absolutely.
Nick, at the moment there's, I think, about 700 houses that are flood affected and have to be, something has to happen with them. 52 have been bulldozed, there's 62 more to be bulldozed, and somebody followed the van which was meant to go to a wood recycler to one of these houses that was bulldozed, and it went straight to a tip in southern Queensland, and they've got that on drone footage that that's what happened. It just seems to me extraordinary that we couldn't do something. They've got the ability to gift all those houses. We could find a block of land, perhaps, that, you know, council, government paid for, that they could even be relocated till this red tape could be worked out between people that want a gift and people that can get. And surely there may be something that we could do with you and your organisation to actually fill that gap and save those houses from absolute ruin. And, you know, they're just decaying and getting vandalised and, you know, pretty awful.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, actually, that sort of stuff's happening in this sort of environment where there's such a housing need. I mean, I know there are community housing organisations up here, you know, who have been trying to work and provide a housing response to the devastating floods. Look, we're small. We are a small community housing provider dealing in this space, but always happy to have a conversation to sort of see if there's anything we can do to assist. I mean, I do think that's a housing action group again that has been around might be able to, you know, bring attention to this. But yeah, look, whatever we can, I can do or we could do to assist that, yeah, happy to help. But yeah, small in the scheme of things, and that's why co-op housing, you know, we're sort of, you know, rental co-op housing. So we're trying to fly the flag and say, look, it's a viable, long-term, affordable rental model that we think has a lot of benefits for community, not just a straight landlord-tenant sort of relationship, but where it's tenant-led. So we're trying to fly the flag for that as well. Yep.
When Sue Higginson was going to come and speak last, we were really aiming to get something to take away from today. And in fact, we've started to draft a communique, which we didn't even know what that was. But anyway, we've been grappling with that. And I think we can do this together if you all leave your contacts and we can stay in touch. And we'll do that largely through social media and the Nimbin Good Times and progress it slowly so everyone is included in that, and, you know, people that may not have had their say, like I was talking to Stu about grey water and things like that. There's lots of things we haven't even talked about. So I'm sure there's much more to include as well.
Ian Dixon, I lived at Tuntable for a long time. I just want to mention the Recovery Housing Group, which is a Pine Street collective. I think we do need to recover the Rural Resettlement Task Force, or whatever Rob mentioned as the current equivalent of that. And I think I've heard today that what we need to do next, or possibly I didn't hear enough just now, is a co-housing collective. That would be to regenerate our claims for housing. We all need a dry cave. Thank you.